Hi, this is Celeste with the Celeste Report, and today Pastor Andy and I are going to talk politics and the imminent UN global takeover. Welcome, Pastor Andy.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's always a joy to be with you.
Yes, I really look forward to these. I really missed it last week when we didn't get a chance to chat, but
Yeah.
there's enough information that we've got it stacked like cordwood, as they
Oh
say
my
out here in the
goodness.
West.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they
So,
say that here too. So it's all good.
yeah. So I don't know, where should we start? We've got
Oh,
the
yeah.
imminent UN global takeover. We've
Yes.
got the second assassination attempt of former President Trump.
Yep.
Or what would you like to start with?
Well, I think obviously that's the hot thing right now is the second person yesterday that came with the intent of ending the life of Mr. Trump. And I think even from the first attempt and obviously a little bit more successful in this is that at least the first guy did get a shot off. The questions that, as a former police officer, the things that bother me are the questions that are not being asked. I mean,
Yes.
that's just what's amazing is here once again. Now on the first go round was clearly a failure to protect, no question about it whatsoever. That almost really clearly leads us to a belief that it was intentional. It was because it was so bad. I mean, that it would almost had to have been on purpose for that young man to have gotten that close. Okay, so we figure, all right, that's one time, and it was, but it happened again. I mean, here's somebody that was able to come onto a private property that did not have any legal right to be there. Obviously didn't come through the main gate or whatever. It was a private place, shouldn't have been there, and was within 300 feet or yards or whatever of the president with an automatic weapon. The reports now that are coming out is that he came there from Hawaii. I mean, he came all the way
Uh,
from Hawaii with the intent. Now he's actually, they're saying, from here in North Carolina where I live, and has had a multiple long record of criminal behavior. And I don't know if he's a felon or not, because if so, that'll bring into the question: how did he get that weapon? How did he get it from Hawaii to there? Did he buy it in Florida? Where? There's so many questions that aren't being asked. And the thing that's most disturbing, and I don't know if you saw this or not, but yesterday, and I don't remember the exact person that it was, but it was some political person, and they sent out a sarcastic, snarky tweet saying, after obviously this person was arrested, and making a mockery of the first attempt where he was shot. And they said, all ears are safe. Go back to your Sunday.
mm.
And it's like, man, these people are really sick. They really are.
Yeah, so you come from a law enforcement, and of course I come from it from former government.
Hmm.
And so what I see is, here we've got next week, the 22nd through the 24th, the unveiling of this five mechanism. It's a legal contractual instrument to for the UN
Yeah.
to usurp all the peoples and all the countries of the entire world.
Yep.
And of course, they have had this socialist agenda since the UN's inception in 1945.
Yep.
And what I see this happening is that, one, they're going to say, well, you see, the United States can't handle its citizens, so
Yeah.
we, the benevolent UN, needs to come in
Yeah.
and protect not only the United States but every country in the world, because quite frankly, the world's a very dangerous place right now.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I see is that, well, another thing is the freedom of speech,
Yeah.
that we're seeing the ringers, the very liberal ringers, um, giving the news coverage very few conservatives are giving, because conservatives always wait until the facts are out there and then they can discuss them without just shooting off their mouth with the party line, if you will.
Right.
And then we've also got the fact that, of course, it's been on the liberal agenda for quite some time to remove us from our, or distance us from our weapons. And of
Yes.
course, they used a AK-47 light. We don't really know if it
Right.
is an automatic, semi-automatic, what it was. But so the UN can also, just as we're going into this very dangerous set of legal mechanisms that are legally binding on each one of us,
Yeah.
that they want to get rid of the guns.
Oh, there's no doubt.
So that, I mean, you can't, it's like a fine hair. Like we've got this week, and then they're basically seizing control of the planet next week.
Yeah.
So it's a very dangerous time, and for all of us. And that's the way I see it. I always look, some people look at the silo event, the actual shooting, but I
Right.
look at it as an integrated weapon system
With
coming. We have to get all the dovetails together to really understand what's going on.
Well, I think what we see with these incidents, I mean, they are making it very, very clear. That's why they keep calling him a threat to everything, because they're
Yes.
trying to poison everybody's mind. I mean, even this guy yesterday in the searching through all of his online activity and different stuff like that is just he's just regurgitating the talking points off of these crazy news networks that keep, calling this man Hitler and all this other stuff. All that's intentional. It's mind
Yes.
games. Everything about it
Yes.
is mind
Yep.
games. But you're right. All this UN stuff and all this other stuff, this stuff's been in play for a long time, but nobody pays it any attention. And when you talk about it, you're a conspiracy kook and you're this and you're that. But don't want to see stuff. And the Bible talks about that in the last days, that people would be willfully blind and willfully ignorant. And that means, it's not that you can't see or that you don't understand, you don't want to. And so people have kind of given over. And I think when we talk about this rising of this one big thing, that's very, very revelation type stuff. That rising of that one beast and that all will give power to that one beast, and it'll have multiple heads and stuff. Well, this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Is how every place around the globe will kind of give it over to this one entity. And some people have kind of misinterpreted that, looking at it as individuals. No one individual is going to have that kind of power. These are massive organizations that, again, will either take this power and authority, or they will convince people this is the right thing to do. And that goes back to creation and the conversation of the enemy, the devil, Satan, however you want to label him, and Adam and Eve. Oh, come on, God didn't really say that, and so they gave in, and so we see that today. And you're right, the ability to protect yourself, the ability to speak your mind, all these different things are being greatly limited, and nobody's listening. I mean, just like you and I were talking about off air. I mean, even here within this country, I mean, for almost 30 years ago, a former president was right in the midst of getting rid of some of our national parks and different stuff to the UN. So this stuff's been going on for a while.
Yeah, but this is like becoming master
Oh
of
yeah,
every single person and every single country.
yeah, it's
And
crazy.
they're using different mechanisms. And what I discovered this morning, I did not even know that this like was happened. But one of the things that I discovered was that they have already issued the United States a UN USA flag.
I'm not surprised.
I kid you not. It's
Yeah,
blue and white. It's the United States flag in blue and white with the wreath or whatever,
yeah.
or the UN wreath around it. And
Wow.
so, I mean, we've already been issued that. And then, and let's see, what are some of what they're going to do is give every person a vote. even the smallest child is going to be given a vote.
Mhm.
And they, of course, it's going to be a deep penetration of the electoral process, which basically began in 2016,
Yeah,
where um, your vote went through a medium, a technological medium, and it basically changed your vote. And so,
yeah.
what we're going to see is that no matter how you vote, whether you vote for the UN or against the UN, it's going to err on the side, or it's going to go in favor of the United Nations.
Well, we've seen
And
that in the last couple of election cycles, to where people about these voting machines saying, "Hey, I voted for so and so, but when I pressed, to submit it, it switched it over to some." I mean, that's in play. That's absolutely real. That's been happening, and I believe what we're seeing with not only the assassination attempts and all the usurping of trying to make this change. I mean, I think the thing with Trump in particular, he slipped one in on them back in 16, and they have been systematically working day and night to make sure that never happens again, because they do not want him there to stop this, because they know he would stop it, and he wouldn't allow it. Or at least I would want to believe that he wouldn't allow it. And that's what they don't want, anybody in the way. But you talking about this voting thing, I'll just share with you and share with those that'll hear this. About maybe 2 weeks ago, went and got the mail in my house, and what's in the mailbox? A mail-in ballot. Okay,
wow, yeah,
listen to this. Listen to this. It didn't
okay.
have a name. It didn't have a name on it. It just said, "To the current resident." Anybody could have filled that thing out. Anybody could have filled it out and sent it in, and then turned around. You could have put anybody's name on there, and then turn around and go in and vote in. Vote in person later. I mean, I tore it up and threw it away. But I thought, now how many more of these unsolicited things have been sent out like this, and there's no accountability on it because there's no name. It just says current resident, and it's a really, and the thing is none of these states and voting district stuff they're not speaking out against it. In fact, I read and heard that the Wisconsin overturned the mail-in box thing, and they put it back in play. And then one or two of the other states, they have come out and said, "Well, we already know that it's going to take at least a week to count the votes." Well, how do you already know that? I mean, this is not professional wrestling where you already know the outcome. I mean, come on, what the heck's going on?
Yeah, it is amazing. It's like when you have to pay bills, it instantly comes out of your account.
Yeah.
But if you are to receive any money, it takes like 2 weeks, 20 days,
Oh,
30
oh,
days.
yeah,
I
it's good.
mean, it's just rigged. I think one thing before we move on that I think is important to bring up is that the NASA Strategic Warfare 2025 document that was put out 20 or 30 years ago,
Yeah.
by the way, it's a living document. So depending on what is operational, the slides will change.
Hmm.
But way back in the day, it said that in the then year, and this is the then year right now,
Hmm.
that Americans would see Americans being tortured,
Wow.
and the part of the definition, if you look up torture, is and or killed
Hmm.
in living color on primetime television. And
Wow.
isn't that what we saw with the first assassination attempt?
Absolutely.
I mean,
No doubt.
it was like, to me, I instantly thought of that document. I got up the slide and gave it in my last presentation, The Color of Evil, because uh, it was in living color and everybody saw,
They did.
not only Americans, but around the world.
Absolutely, and I think what we're finding more and more now, with the advent of social media and video presence, and people with these deals, we're seeing stuff now that we would have never even dreamed of seeing before. I mean, just like, well, the recent, and again, I guess I want to be careful, but I don't think coincidences are true, and I mean, things happen intentional, and there's no way around. I mean, some of these things that happen, like these school shootings and all this stuff, those things are, there's reasons behind a lot of this stuff that goes on, way more than we want to admit. But just like the neglect in these security measures with a former president. I mean, I told my wife, I said, Jimmy Carter's 100 years old in a nursing home, and there's a detail around him. You couldn't get close to him.
Yeah.
And here's a man that's viable and out playing golf and doing whatever, and somebody got there. I mean, there's a failure there of epic proportions, which leads us to believe it's on purpose. I mean, this is not, well, because one of the Secret Service people said yesterday, said, well, we didn't have enough people to cover the perimeter. That's not an excuse. That's your job.
Yeah.
When I was on the road, we had to do governor details. And if the president came through, we had to work those, Bush and different ones that came through, Clinton, all the different ones. And it's like, there was absolutely not a crack in the barrier. That was inexcusable. You didn't do that. And so that's gotten so lax now. And it's a real shame what we're seeing. But I think you're right. We're going to see, whether it's that event, whether it's live video from some horrifying, shooting or this, that, we're going to see things now that we could have never imagined.
Absolutely. And I think we should bring up the fact, and this is like, we all have things that like are nails on a chalkboard to us. And so all the pundits and anchors are saying, in our democracy, we are a republic,
Yeah.
which is a representative republic.
Right.
Yes, since World War II, we've been sliding into this democracy state, but this is not our original design form of government, what we're seeing now. And you will see a disproportionate amount of protection detail. And we'll talk, maybe I should do it now. I got to give my example, then I'll do it.
Okay.
So I was just happened to be passing by on a speaking tour in Atlanta on Martin Luther King Day. And
Okay.
President Biden flew in,
Mhm.
and they had 10 lanes. You've been to Atlanta, 10 lanes of traffic on each side. We were stopped for 3 hours.
I can believe that.
No traffic at all. BLM guys and women going door to door on the stopped cars, but we went nowhere. They had gridlock in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Now they would not look at how much it took, the resources that took for just President Biden coming in for a couple hours and then darting out. So we can see this disproportionate security. So how does this tie into this UN global takeover next week? So what the UN has decided is that they are going to elevate children and women to high places of policy making and security details. What do you think about that, Pastor Andy?
Well, I think, everything now there's an agenda behind everything. I mean, it's just like allowing all these illegals to come into this country. There's a reason. I mean, there's a reason, and it is to unweigh the balance. It is to get everything off kilter, because some of the things they're proposing are just insanity. I mean, just like giving them a bunch of money to buy a house and doing this and doing that. Well, we live here forever and we don't get nothing. And again, I'm not looking for a handout, but I work for what I've got. But here we find it's just such an unfair balance. And you're right. They continue, because all this is mind games, and they continue to say the same catchphrases over and over and over on TV. And that is to normalize the whole, he's a threat to our democracy, and, or go do this and go do that. And they normalize and they pretty up everything. Everything now has a pretty name. Everything now has a pretty wrapping behind it, but they don't tell you what's behind it. It's the whole, well, we got to vote for it before we can tell you what it is thing. And and people really, really need to get their head out of the sand and stop listening to some of this stuff without understanding, wait a minute, this person does not have my best interest at heart. They are not telling me the truth, or they're telling me what they want me to hear. But you better do your own homework, and you'll find out that that pretty snake laying on the rock that you think is harmless, it will bite you.
Absolutely. So they've been saying that President Trump is an existential threat
Yes.
to the democracy. Now, where did that word existential threat even come from? It goes back to the 1960s, the Cold War
That's
era,
right.
but of recent days, it started to be used more. Then it was nuclear weapons,
Yep.
then it was transhumanism. But now it's in the context of the United Nations, they are talking about an existential threat as being social and behavioral
Yeah.
characteristics that they want to change in us. And so basically, next week, the 22nd to the 24th, the if you're familiar with the Great Reset out there,
Mhm.
everyone, like it's 250 different layers deep. It's going to impact every part of your lives. And that kicks off next week in earnest. We did
Mhm.
see it slightly with COVID, but we were all focused, and that was the fog of war.
Oh, that
So
was the
under
test. That was an absolute test. There was no question about that.
well, it also a lot of what we're going to see roll out next week is that under COVID they were doing the infrastructure
Mhm.
for what we're seeing next week.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, these five legal contractual instruments were already agreed on by global consensus, which means we never got a say. You didn't have a say.
Right.
I didn't have a say. They are going to give every person on the planet a vote. But like I said, it will not be an honest vote. They just, by giving you a vote, they hope that you will buy in to the
Yeah.
system. So
Yeah.
back in the early 2000s, the government did this test for the people, and they said they wanted people to give their information into a database. And people were kind of hesitant in the early 2000s about doing that. And so they offered like keychains, popcorn, a mug, free tickets to a movie, 2 tickets to a movie, and they just saw and they metriced out what people would sell their private data for.
Mhm.
And of course Facebook and other social media, people just gave. I mean, they
Gave.
would post their children's pictures, baby pictures. These people have no place to hide
No.
in the event of a persecution situation.
Oh, there's no doubt. Well, you mentioned this whole existential threat thing. I think the other side of that is the more that they promote those kind of things, the more that they can convince people that they are justified in the removal of certain people.
Yes.
That well they won't comply, or they won't this. So we are justified in the well basically executing whatever, and whether it's a leader or whether it's whatever. And that's where we're finding, because the more that you can convince people that this is okay, or the more that you can, as I say, pretty it up. It's just like, just like the whole abortion argument. If we can give it a pretty title, like reproductive rights, or we can give it a pretty title, you can't tell me what to do with my body, and this and that. That messes with your mind if you don't realize the agenda behind it. And then people are like, oh yeah, I can go along with that. I understand that. That makes more sense now. And the problem with that is the one that has no conscience about abusing power. They will take that to the nth degree, and we've already seen. I mean, I think there's not a question, and we can look back even into the '60s when they killed Kennedy. He didn't go along. He wasn't going to go along with some of this stuff, so he had to go. And with Reagan, that was a clear warning shot, literally. And I think the same thing with Trump. They're making it clear, we're going to do this, and we're going to make sure you stay out of the way. And for the rest of us out here, we just need to understand the Bible said this was coming. We just need to see how it all lines up. And again, some of the people within I don't want to say industry, but in my line of work as pastors, are doing a disservice because they're not staying focused on the message, and they're getting more and more all splintered all over the place, and they're getting people all tied down with theology and doctrinal stuff and this and that, and you're missing the message. Even within the church community, a lot of people are so divided. I just had someone in my office this morning, and they're so divided by the ability to understand things. But what's the message? The message is Jesus, and he tells us everything is coming.
Absolutely, he does. And and he says that not one jot or tittle will be done away with. I mean, these things all must come to pass. So
Yep.
we can expect some rough days ahead, but he will be with you and he will carry you if need be.
Yes.
I know he's carried me in my life, and I know that he's carried you in your life during these trials and different things. So, I was going to say something about the 1990s you mentioned, but it's like long gone now. My mind's racing. So I just want to go down. Oh, when was the existential threat became code of law? Let's see. It was introduced to Congress, Senate Bill 4488. It was the Global Catastrophic Risk Management Act of 2022. It went into effect 2023. And basically, it defined what an existential threat was. And so the government actually, in many cases, they play semantic games. And they speak one semantic, and they know that if you didn't know the term, you would go to your Webster's dictionary, but that is not the language that they're using. So, but in this case, they did define it. So an existential risk or threat is a risk of human extinction. So
Wow.
what they are saying is that it's a risk of human extinction. Now, a catastrophic incident, this is pretty interesting, means that your infrastructure can be destroyed, damaged, interrupted, threatened. And then this is called the emergency clause for the health, safety, and welfare. And I'm not sure in law enforcement, did you ever run into the emergency clause?
Oh yeah.
So the emergency clause suspends Constitution. It
That's right.
suspends our Constitution. It suspends other Constitution. So if you see health, safety, and welfare, it could be well-being. The United Nations uses well-being quite a bit. Then you know that the process or your Constitution is being in the process of being suspended.
That's right.
That's really important to remember. And one other ploy that I saw I was familiar from the 90s of the emergency clause, but what they did with COVID is they get on stage, for the daily updates, and the WHO person or the vice president would say health. The WHO lady would say safety, and whoever else, CDC or whoever,
Right.
would say well-being. They were acting as one, like a Roman phalanx. And they thought, because I was already teaching people about the emergency clause and the abuses of it. And so then they started this trick like the next week. So just beware that they're very tricky. They will try and break it up with different people or have it in one sentence, use one word, but it is still acting as one. So
Absolutely.
I think
Well, that's why I believe, just based on what you're saying, when the Harris is making her speeches, she's always telling people about. She said Trump's going to suspend the Constitution. They're planting the seeds, because they got to they want to have a scapegoat. They don't ever want it to be me, but they're always telling you what they're going to do through somebody else. I mean, that's just. But we saw so many things when I was on the road with the suspension of different things and stuff. And I'll never forget this. This is a true story. I was sitting in my office and someone I was the chief of police, and a person came to me from the government, and they said, "We'd like for you to read this document." I said, "Okay." and it was what would later become the Patriot Act. And they said, as a law enforcement official, and in that particular time, I was the chief of police. They said, where do you stand with this? I said, this is awful. They said, what do you mean? I said, we don't need that much authority. This is going too far, And they were like, well, why would you think that? I'm like, because we don't need to have this much authority. This is not right. Well, of course, I mean, I'm a voice of one. I mean, that made no difference to them in a hill of beans. But it was an unbelievable thing to me that this was getting ready to happen, and sure enough, it did. And I thought one of the funniest things I ever heard. And again, I don't support almost nobody when it comes to these politicians. But one of the funniest things I ever heard was back in it must have been in the early 2000s, whenever I think it was a Bush and Kerry gimmick, but it was before Kerry got it. And a guy named Dennis Kucinich, he was running for president as well. And I remember them polling the guys on the stage, and they said, because he was a senator at the time, and they said, Senator, you're the only one up here that didn't vote for the Patriot Act. Why? He said, because I read it. And I thought that was like again, he had some other terrible things, but I thought, okay, this guy just told the truth. So that was interesting. But yeah, this has been going on for a long time.
So it was very interesting. So in the 1990s, a lot of our protections disappeared. And so there is a book called The Holocaust Chronicles. And if you look in the Holocaust Chronicles, it's a book that goes by it describes what happened each month during the whole Holocaust. And in the United States, we were passing the same law with the same name on the same date as Nazi Germany.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, for instance, the National Defense Authorization Act, where the executive office has the power to terminate any person without judge, jury, trial, anything. They can just disappear you. You could be in a prison, or you could just be executed.
Mm-hmm.
That law was passed with the same name on the same date back as Hitler used. And I was horrified. And there were other bills as well that were Hitler Nazi laws that went into effect in this country during the 90s on the same day with the same name.
It's awful, the things that have slipped through that nobody paid any attention to, but if you understand how that lines up biblically, anytime that the ruling class at that time, the Pharisees and what have you, wanted to get something done, they did it in the middle of the night when nobody was around. Just like the trial of Jesus, they held it at night and paid people to be there to lie, because they knew if they held it in the daytime, it wouldn't work. And so we see the same thing. And I mean, in fact, the Patriot deal was passed in the middle of the night, and they didn't have but just a few people to vote for it, but they got it in. But you mentioned that deal about just, I guess the new hot term now is unalive people. So
unalive?
Yeah. I've heard a few people, because they make posts and different things. And they use the word killed or dead or whatever, and they get taken down. And so they get flagged for inappropriate content or whatever. So they've switched that around and said, well, when they unalive somebody, and that's quite interesting. But I remember there was an interview with Obama, and they asked him about what was the greatest thing about the drone technology, and he said, because you can kill a lot of people, and I've gotten really good at it. And it's like, man, I mean, and he said it with a very calm demeanor. He had no problem with it whatsoever. So, yeah, it's definitely, a lot of people have disappeared, and not all of it was just on TV and all this stuff. I mean, there's some pretty serious stuff going on out there. But yeah, if they want you gone, you'll be gone.
Well, let's dig into some of the the rollout for next week, so that you're all prepared. And I just want you to know that this, we talked about it briefly, but I didn't give you the date, that this has already been determined and passed by global consensus, which means, that and who knows how they took the vote, But they took the vote on a very provocative day, July, or what am I saying? April 8th. And
Okay.
that was the same day as the solar eclipse.
This is true.
And it will, because this is important, because they do astronomical, there are certain astronomical events. We even find this out in the Bible, like in the book of Esther, where Haman consulted the astrologers to see the
That's right.
propitious day to annihilate the Jews. Well, the same thing happened with COVID. They also did their tech, and they found out that they had to roll out the vaccine on November 2nd
Yep.
because it was a favorable, it would amplify the effects of the vaccination. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's also, interestingly enough, uh, National All Is Ours Day. I've never heard of
No.
National All Is Ours Day,
Mm.
but I'll be getting into it, into the weeds tomorrow night. Celestialreport2.com. You can join me, but let's discuss. So these are what's coming next week. Pact for the Future. The Pact for the Future is a comprehensive framework for global cooperation. It is a sweeping document, much like the Patriot Act, of
Mm.
guiding international action to resolve current crises and shift its focus to the future. The next document is Declaration on Future Generations.
Wow.
This is actually a generational curse.
Mm.
They will actually be cursing the generations in this document.
Wow.
The Declaration on Future Generations is a forthcoming international agreement aimed at acknowledging the responsibility of the present generation towards the future generations. It is a concept of the UN Charter, and the idea of this declaration was imagined and proposed in 2022. It
Wow.
was also agreed on in advance by consensus. The
Mm.
next thing that we're going to look at is the Global Digital Compact. The Global Digital Compact is a proposed international agreement. Well, it's already passed, but they're going to just declare it next week on the fall equinox, aimed at outlining guiding principles for a digital future that, get this, that is open, free, secure, and human centered, not
Wow.
mankind. A
Yeah.
human can be anything, and it
Right.
can be a chimera, it could be a robot.
Wow.
Many things can be persons or human.
Mm.
It also was agreed on in advance on, in whatever date I said it was, in the spring. Um, so I want to take a moment and just stop. And one of the glaring um, things about this digital compact, yes, it's going to change our currency. There is a UN currency in weight. We are only going to get a fraction of whatever we have in the bank. And it's going to make the rich richer, and it's going to sink the rest of us. They really want, they said in their documents, the United States to be at the economic level and production level of Malaysia. So
Wow.
that's where they've got that. But for me, the most startling thing, revelation in this is remember I talked about the elevation of women and children to high policy and security details. What they are promising is that you will have human rights, because there's a new human rights. We haven't got to that yet, but there
Right.
is a new human rights. It's not your inalienable God-given rights, but it is rights, human rights as decreed by the United Nations.
Wow.
So if you enter the metaverse, you will be protected. And they especially say, you women, children, you won't be trafficked, there won't be violence against you. We're going to eradicate that. The caveat is that you live your life in the metaverse.
Hmm.
It is your digital self that has the protections.
Wow.
If you stay outside, if you say, I like my original design, the way that I was born or created in my worldview, then you do not have protection against violence or trafficking.
Wow.
So everyone must enter into this for any protection um, to the UN Digital Contract
Wow.
Compact.
Well,
Okay, the
it's
next one is that there is. Did you want to
well, I
say
was going to
something
say
before I
that
move
just
on?
it's a very similar, as we read about the mark of the beast, you can't do this, you can't do that. Or, I mean, it's very, very, you know, looking like something in that respect. And I think also the deal, just listening to what you're talking about, then it all makes sense now that every single speech that Harris gives, she uses the phrase "turn the page."
Yes.
There's a reason behind that.
Yeah, they're forward thinking.
Yep.
And this is the future that they want.
Wow.
And we're going to dispense, we're going to throw the shackles in the Bible, it says, off of us, the bonds to God. And we are going to strike out and do this synthetic digital twin created or engineered in the image of Satan.
Wow.
Um, so the other new thing is a new rule of law. So remember in the debate, there was a discussion about the rule of law by Kamala, but there is a new rule of law. She was not talking about the United States rule of law. She was
Yep.
talking about the new UN rule of law. And what is that? The maintenance of international peace and security and the full respect of the international rule of law, which is the new rule of law, must be promoted in line, lockstep, with the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. What
Wow.
that means, I mean, they throw that in, but it's like the old Babylonians, Assyrians.
Yeah.
They, whatever country you're in, you will be a vassal of the United Nations. So, yes, you might have a border, but it's going to be the United Nations that calls the shots.
So do you think this is what was behind them switching the deal in 20 and getting Trump out? Was that part of the agenda? I mean, because we know that election was not legitimate. Um, is that, and I'm asking this as a question. Do you think that was the one of the reasons behind trying to get all this stuff enacted? He was in the way.
He was in the way, and especially right now, he's in perilous. We need to pray for
Yeah.
former President Trump because he talks about oil, restoring our economy, um, making getting production back on board. These things are antithetical to this
Okay.
plan that the UN is rolling out, and we haven't got to that part yet. But they want us to live in squalor. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, I'll tell you now, they call it the slum the slum. Oh, we'll have to wait to get to it. Slum something other.
Mhm.
It's the modern day ghettos. They
Wow.
are this infrastructure, and it really started in 2020. They were building this infrastructure as a technological ghetto,
Hmm.
and for control purposes and such. I keep losing my earpiece here. Okay, new human rights. They are going to reaffirm commitment to the Charter of the United Nations, as well as a Declaration of Human Rights. There, that includes acknowledging that investing in the United Nations, that will be incumbent, they said, on every individual, every family business, every corporate business, every country to invest in the United Nations to build a strong foundation for sustainable peace, prosperity, and protection of human rights. to safeguard the needs and interests of future generations.
Wow.
Thoughts?
It's really scary. I mean, when you think about the evil that dwells in these people's hearts. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is. But again, I mean, it's what Scripture said was coming, that there would come a day, and I think that we're maybe it's a little shocking because while we as believers knew, it's just like anything in real life. You can know something is coming, but you still are never really prepared until you actually see it, and then it's a little overwhelming sometimes.
And it can be a good thing too. Like
It
just
can be.
when you got married, you're looking for the day, you're planning for the
Yeah,
day, and then you get to the day and you're like pinching yourself, going, I can't believe it's today.
yeah,
And then the next day you're going, I just spent all this time in preparation and then it's in the past.
yeah. No,
So,
I just think that kind of what we've been talking about this whole thing is. Uh, I just hope that we can have the opportunity, and this should be our prayer, is that we have the opportunity to continue for as long as we're able to share the truth and open people's eyes so that people are ready. Because I think that's the most important message is just be ready. Because it's not about ifs, it's just when. It's coming. But how do we prepare for that? And evil, evil is a terrible thing, but we see in the book of Romans, it says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I still believe that we win. I do believe that, but it's going to get ugly before then.
yeah, and I think perfect love casts out fear. And,
Yes.
love for our Savior, but love for each other. And, and that's the reason that I'm going public with this now, so that you all know what's coming and
Hmm.
you won't be fearful of what's coming. I mean, yeah, it's not going to be fun,
Hmm.
but when it doesn't blindside you. I remember when my husband was killed. I it was we said I love you to each other. He got in the car. He said I'll see you tonight. He got in the car, went to work. 15 minutes later, he's gone,
Wow.
and that blindsided me.
Yeah.
And I don't want anyone, for lack of knowledge, to be blindsided. I
Yeah.
want you to know so that you can prepare. And even though I was blindsided, so let's say you just tuck our conversation under your hat. That's okay. But when it's time, you just take this conversation out, remember the important parts, and move on. He will provide, and he will care for. Jesus will care for you anyway,
That's right.
whether you've made provision or not.
No, you're right.
So
He says, don't add anything to your life by worry. You said, you trust me, and I believe that. I know it's difficult sometimes, and I challenge myself and others. When I'm ministering, I know sometimes it's difficult to say, just lean into your faith. But right now, with the evil that is around us, our faith is that's what we've got. That's our greatest strength, is holding on to that, because he'll get us through it.
he
Well, I
will.
say I
He
say
will.
that he'll get us through it. He'll take us home one way or the other.
It's a win-win
Yeah,
situation as far
yeah.
as I'm concerned. Okay, let's see. Then there's the elevation of women and children, and that is brought to you by the Higher Education for Good, and the acronym is HE4G. I'm former government, so I love my acronyms. The Club of Rome, Youth Talks, and the 50%, and also the Youth Resilient Hub. Okay, here's what I forgot. Okay, this is the glorification or the beautification of slum dwelling.
Wow.
So the slum dwellers are individuals who they're going to make all of us the same, who reside in informal settlements or slums characterized by inadequate housing, poor living conditions, limited access to basic amenities such as sanitation, clean water, healthcare, dependent upon the UN for all their provisions. It is the modern day ghetto, and it is brought to you by Slum Dwellers International.
Wow.
Thoughts?
It's just awful. I mean, the idea, but again, it's not hard to believe. because the elitist, as we see, with some of the speeches that they give, they kind of tell you this stuff right up front. We're
Yes.
going to do this, we're going to do it, but nobody believes it because it's so outlandish that they're like, oh, that could never happen. But it does. And I think that's one of the things that people have gotten lulled into a sense of, oh, that's again, that's a conspiracy theory and that's this. But all that stuff's been done on purpose. There was an experiment done back in the 60s by the KGB, and you're probably familiar with this, but they would lock people in a place and they would play this propaganda stuff for them for days on end. And then they would let them out of that room and they would tell them, okay, you were part of an experiment. None of that was real. None of that was real. It was all just to manipulate you in the way that you think. But we want to tell you the truth now. And that they said like 80% of the people refused to hear. They said, oh, what we heard was it. And so we see this mind-numbing stuff going on TV, never-ending news cycles. But what's funny, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is now a few people have picked up on it, and they'll make these montages of like mini screens of all the different news broadcasts around the country, and they're all saying the same thing. I mean, it's like a script. It's you've never seen anything like it, and it is so time to open your eyes. I mean, it is just unbelievable.
So that actually came about as a result of 9/11.
Yeah.
So up until that point, different stations, yeah, they covered the same news, but they were getting close to doing some messaging close to 9/11. And then
Mhm.
once 9/11 happened, law enforcement, it went out to the station
Yep.
media, everybody, you have the 3 bullet points, you can't deviate.
Yep.
Everybody has to say the same thing because what they did not want, and it is real, and you can verify this yourself, is that at the beginning of an event, there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation.
Yep.
And so they didn't want to have to battle that. So that's accurate from law enforcement,
Oh,
correct?
without a doubt. Without a
Yeah.
doubt. Everything, even on that day, the whole 9/11 deal, the earlier that morning, if you can't find it now, but earlier that day, there was actual reports of what was really going on. But as the day went by, there was a massive swing about something else. And those of us that were working that day, which I was on patrol that day and saw everything. What was said that morning at 8 o'clock or whatever it was, and what was told later on at 3 was two very different things. And now all that original stuff has either been destroyed or it's locked away somewhere very, very safely because they don't want people to hear that. Because
Yeah.
they don't want the truth out. They hate the truth more than anything because even as Scripture says, the truth is what sets you free. And that truth is not just a verbal thing or a printed word. It's in here. And once you know that, it says that. Now the quote has been accredited to a couple of different people, whether it's George Washington or different ones, but there was another couple of other people that it was accredited to. So I don't know who actually said it, but they said you cannot enslave a Bible reading public. And what does that mean? Well, you know the truth. And so once you know that, they can't trap you. They might can trap you physically, and they may be able to usher you into this or that, but they can't mess up your mind because you know better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Now we're going to go to the Earth System Treaty, and that's brought to you by the Club of Rome. The Earth System Treaty is a worldwide legal agreement committing everyone who signs it to work to protect a habitable planet for us and for our grandchildren and for the generations of the future. They have defined a generation as 150 years, and in certain like Gobekli Tepe archaeological digs, they have pretty much suspended archaeology. They've planted it over with orchards. They have
Mm.
um, put concrete sidewalks and roads over it. And they said, we are not going to do any more excavation. And this is like a 10,000-year-old settlement.
Mhm.
until it is for future generations. It's
Wow.
not for you, it's for future generations. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the forward thinking.
Mhm.
So scientists, the United Nations, and governments around the world that have acknowledged that we are facing the greatest crisis in all of human history. But this is political, using the United Nations ideology, not the real threats. So they. So have you ever read Report from Iron Mountain?
I can't say that I have. No.
Okay, so that was a classified report during the Kennedys, um, and basically to get the world from a war to a peace loving planet, they generated like 10 existential threats.
Okay.
And so these were manufactured. They were not real threats, but
Mm.
um, they said that it would endanger all the species. So the United Nations, it's not using the same, but it is using a few, and we will look at those momentarily. So they are claiming that the United Nations is the only place in the world where you can get a global treaty signed,
Wow.
and that's what they're going to do next week. It's really, they've already decided on it. It's just penning it and declaring it.
Mhm.
The UN is calling on every individual citizen on planet Earth to sign this treaty and commit themselves, legally binding, to a habitable Earth, in their eyes, what's habitable
Right.
for their grandkids. So they're
Wow.
playing on the emotion.
Yep.
For your grandkids, you'll do anything. The UN is calling on every individual citizen to sign this treaty, and this will be the first true act of global democracy.
Wow. Well,
Giving everybody a vote on the Earth System Treaty sends an unmistakable message to governments around the world that this is what the people of the world want, and they will be out of step with humanity if they don't go along with it. Your thoughts?
well, I mean, again, it's mind games. Everything today, and that's why I really encourage people, listen to what these people are saying, because they're telling you up front what they're going to do. I mean, they don't really hide it anymore. I remember, and I think that, again, I know it sounds a little arrogant. I don't mean it that way, but I think when you are in tune spiritually, and you really, really have your heart right, and your understanding of who Christ is, you begin to see things that other people don't see. You hear things that other people don't hear. Because I remember this, and I don't know why this stands out to me, but I remember it was a speech that Obama was giving several years ago, and all the things that he was saying were exactly what you're talking about. We're going to do this, and we're going to take this, and all these other things. And the people like trained SEALs were standing up and clapping, and I'm like, did you not just hear what he just said? I mean, it's like, but it's mind games. If you've ever seen the original Left Behind movie, with Kirk Cameron, and there's a scene in that movie where they play out, and they're at the UN, and Nikolai Carpathia, the Antichrist in the movie, he kills two people, but he tells everybody in the room that they committed suicide. And so everybody walks out of the room saying, "Did you see that? That was just awful. They got so distressed and took their own life." And it's like, did you not? And so the Kirk Cameron character is like, did you not just see what? But that's what we're seeing, this stuff play out in real life now, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, if the weather report tells you that it's clear and sunny, but it's like raining and thundering and
Yeah,
lightning,
yeah.
you're expected to believe that it's clear and sunny
Oh
outside,
yeah.
and
No, yes.
that's
Don't ask questions. Tell whatever. If we tell you this guy's bad, or if we tell you this, you have to believe it. Well, just like the whole during the whole safe and effective gimmick. Well, if you believe that, you're probably on the other side of not believing that now, realizing how sick you are. So, again, everybody's got their own view on that, but I know how many funerals I have done after that, and it's been a lot. And I know how many people that I know that are drastically sick because they went along with that. Yeah, it's safe and effective. And they
yeah,
sold it with a smile.
yeah. Well, they didn't, and I think we should talk about choosing sources for a minute.
Yeah.
We had wanted to talk about that like last week, the importance of choosing your source
Yeah.
wisely in these days and asking questions. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, I could not agree more. I have a saying that I kind of came up with. The source of your resource is very important. Where did you get that? Because if you are just taking what you're hearing, and again, I'll just use a personal example. And I love my mom and dad, but their informational stream is just mainstream media. They don't veer off of that because the Lester Holtz and the whoever of the world, that they wouldn't possibly tell you anything that was wrong. Well, they're just telling you what they were told to tell. But the people that aren't willing to do their homework, and the people that just take at face value something that someone says because they're notable or they're a celebrity or they've been around for a long time. And I say that even in the ministry, there's a lot of pastors that are notable in that they've got a big recognized name because they had a popular book or they have a big church with 10,000 people. But if you listen to what they're saying, and I say this not to be critical, but to be careful, be very, very careful. You're not always hearing the truth. And so vet stuff, understand stuff, but more importantly, run it through your God filter. He'll tell you, the Holy Spirit will tell you whether it's true or not. And I really, really do believe that.
I absolutely agree. And sometimes I don't trust my own, just a sec. Uh, Sometimes if I'm not sure, I'll go to the word
Yeah.
because, the word gives it like concrete,
Yes.
um, where sometimes, is it not? And then you have to when you choose a source, you have to put it in context. Just like if we take couple words out of a scripture, I mean, we're not getting like the sentence before and the sentence after. We have to get the context. Like
Absolutely.
if we would have gone through this list in 2015, it would have seemed nobody would have even understood what we were talking about.
Not a word. No.
But now they can. We can all understand the
Mhm.
context. We can understand the context of weaponized pathogens because we've been through that.
Yep.
And so this is across the board, whether it's media or a physician or anybody. If they're claiming something, you really need to do your homework. I think I started this. I really was like the first one out of the hopper with telling people what was in the vax. And because at the time, the pharmaceutical companies and the bioweapon places, they they put it on their front page. They didn't think anybody was looking.
Right.
And so I documented, I put their name, I put what the name of the vaccine was, I put what country because that makes a difference. I put the ideology of the company
That's right.
because you need to know what their ideology is. Even like if you're going to buy a pair of sandals or whatever, do you want to promote a certain business that has an ideology that's very different than yourself?
Mhm.
And then I got an Amazon one to tell you. So I on the road you watch a TV because I guess I was too lazy to get my laptop in and do work. And it was an education. So the vice president of Amazon comes on and he says, we are now going to be running, if you want to leave, like, let's say you buy a product and you want to leave a review, your review now is run through artificial intelligence
Mhm.
and they are going to verify your review because they do not want to adversely impact that product if
Yeah.
you write a bad review. And
That's
I
right.
just went, oh my goodness. Now, as if we didn't have to be concerned about what's in every product that we've
Yeah.
got. Now we don't even have the freedom to do an honest review. it's being run through artificial
Yeah.
intelligence. So
This manipulation stuff is just awful because again, with something like that, if you're trying to legitimately share with a friend, a neighbor, or a stranger for that fact, hey, you know what, this product, I bought it and it didn't work. You should be able to tell people that. They shouldn't be able to false advertise that it's hey, this is great, but there again, good is now called evil and evil is now called good. So it's really we were talking about your source. I mean, understanding scripture many years ago, a lot of people really didn't, because it seems so just out of touch and futuristic and stuff. I've known pastors, from that are much, much older, and they said, that their fathers or grandfathers were pastors back in the 20s and 30s, and they were like, "How was I? Yes, okay, it's in the Bible. I don't understand it. None of it makes any sense. How is this possible? Reaching the whole world, or doing this or doing that?" And so I think systematically, as time has gone by, now we're seeing, wait a minute, not only does this now make more sense because it was written often, a lot of it was written in future tense, but now it's making total sense because it's like, well, what the heck is happening right in front of me now? So yeah, this is very, very, very important. So just listen. The Bible says, "Be still and hear the still small voice of God." I believe that if we'll still listen, He'll still speak.
yeah, and take those scales off your eyes, or allow the Lord to take your scales. I mean, when I went to prayer at the beginning of um, COVID, I I asked the Lord. I said, "What spirits am I dealing with here?" Much easier for Him to tell me than for me to just wade through. Get my hip waders. I
Yep.
can if I need to. And He said it was very interesting. He said the first is a spirit of blindness. You need to pray that the Lord would remove the spirit of blindness, and then you can deal with the big bad boy, the giant of the day, which was pharmakia.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
so that was, and I've used that constantly ever
Yep.
since the beginning of 2020.
Oh yeah, no,
Well,
that's a beautiful, thing. I remember praying very similarly on my way to work one morning, crossing the causeway in Tampa, Florida, and they were Hugh Hewitt was on the radio, and he was pushing and pushing and pushing this vaccine, saying if you don't get it, you're an awful human being, and you're going to kill your grandparents and all this, and I just began to just deeply, deeply seek the Lord because I didn't want to be wrong. And I said, Lord, what is the answer with this? And they're coming out with this thing, and I have been a kind of an anti-doctor guy anyhow for a long time. But I said, this stuff sounds dangerous, but I want to know. And I'm telling you as clear as I'm talking to you, within my spirit, He said, leave that stuff alone. Never touch it. And I've never done it, and I have no regrets about not it.
yeah, I didn't, because he told me no. And as a matter of
Yeah.
fact, he then I had me do a Bible study. It violates all of the Ten Commandments.
Yep.
It violates the Levitical sacrificial system, including Jesus' once and for all sacrifice, because the power's in life is in the blood.
Yep. It is.
And then I went in and I saw there were biological weaponry, novel and exotic weaponry.
Yep.
They were mixing your genes with different animals to make you a chimera. You're then patentable. There's African green monkeys. There's cancer. It was seeded with so many things that it was. I did 60 representative, but there were 600 at the time. Who knows how many there are
Oh
now?
my word, there's no. And now they're coming out with a new one for this fall to boost more people. But they say the cancer rate's never been higher than it is right now,
Yeah.
especially in children, and onset dementia and Alzheimer's has never increased as fast as rapidly as it is now. And I'm seeing that in both of my parents. They both had it out of nowhere, and they're getting worse every day.
So maybe you and I have to have a private talk about that. So
Yeah,
off air. So, or maybe we can talk about it openly the next time next week.
absolutely, absolutely.
So there's a couple more things, and then we'll wrap up. There's also now Dr. James Giordano marched up and down at military conferences, saying that they had the ability to capture the soul.
Right.
and had for years. And I didn't, I didn't deep dive on it until a couple of years ago.
Mm.
And I did deep dive, and it's called Soul Catcher. If you want to catch the series, celestialreport2.com. But here in the documents, they're talking about mind joining through technology. The
Wow.
joining of minds at light speed around the entire world is probably the most important evolutionary, of course, we don't believe in evolution,
Mm.
development in the whole human history, because they want to make everyone a new species of transhumanists
Wow.
or transhumanism. A new planetary emergency and of crucial importance for the next 6 to 7 years. Um, God's cycle of time is converging with the elite, threatening the planetary health and stability of planet Earth. The elite have fabricated a large energy imbalance on planet Earth. The elite have eroded the resilience of the living biosphere, and the elite have transgressed, although they are blaming it on you, the average hardworking person out there. 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries they say that we have sinned against, but that's actually the United Nations, causing physical and ecological um, things. They want to return us back to the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
or a time known as the Holocene. And I'm not going to go into that. You can catch my private briefing tomorrow,
Right.
celestialreport2.com. And so basically, they're saying we have to go back to this Garden of Eden existence. You can't, you're just going to be a little wanderer
Yeah.
with them as the lords.
Mm.
And we are just wandering around with not much. No electricity, no stores, no nothing. I just want to close this. Of course, there is much more that I'll get into in my private briefing, but what is a novel entity? And I know a lot of people are discussing this, especially doctors and researchers. I did a whole webinar on synthetic biology, smart dust, nanoparticles, nanobots. Um, I want you to understand that these entities, about 5 years ago or six
Mhm.
years ago, the journal started calling them entities.
Wow.
Before that, they were known as smart dust or nanotech or nanobots.
Mhm.
But they started to refer to them as entities. And in these documents, these UN talks about the release of these novel entities, and that's okay. But behind these entities are forces. In the book of Daniel, it talks about the God of forces. And if you are interested in that, you can go to shepherdsheart.life. And I did an article and just type in the search bar God of forces.
Mm.
But these are in the Bible. Let's look at what the Bible says about entities. They are distinct and separate from each other. So it's none of this kumbaya,
Yeah.
one world stuff.
Right.
And the concept is tied to God, creation, and humanity or mankind. Now, these entities in the Bible have mass or matter, energy, information, and volition or will.
Yes.
They can be spiritual beings, angels, demons, or even souls, corporate entities, but usually they are a single entity with its own identity, and then there are individual entities, and they do want to have us give up our identity. And I covered this is at shepherdsheart.life on my blog, Biology Culture by Design, Marxism, Synbio, and Sex. And this whole LGBT was orchestrated in part to get us to give up our identity.
Yeah.
Um, and especially sexual identity is very strong, but also our God given identity. Thoughts?
Well, no, if we read the book of Romans, it says that they gave up their natural use, their natural. I mean, so we're talking about again, our identity as men and women and what have you, and it gave themselves over to that, and so when we start thinking about what we're seeing, again, there's some pretty strong evidence that even with this shot gimmick that it's messed with a lot of people in that way too. So because we see this massive move now. There's always been some little components of that around, even from back in Bible times. But now we're seeing it. It's messing with kids, and it's become such an agenda. And they really keep pushing this, and even in these political races, they're demanding more and more and more control over your children. And even to the point of where, I mean, my 15-year-old daughter has an issue with one of her front teeth that needs to be fixed. Okay, but I can't help her get that done until she's 18 years old. It's against the law to go and have a implant put in her mouth because that's what has to have happen because she broke a tooth and it can't come back. So we got to have one of those artificial teeth made to put her, but they will not let me do it because until she's 18, they said it's against the law. However, she's 15 years old and can go get an abortion without me knowing about it. And so I mean, they want control over our lives, and as you mentioned earlier, elevating children, women, whatever the case may be. All this stuff's real. I mean, we can kind of scoff at it and blow it off, like you said, or not paying attention, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. I mean, I heard Charles Stanley many years ago. He gave this illustration that made a lot of sense. He said, you can stand on the shore in Hawaii, and you can look at one of those gigantic waves that is coming, like you used to see on the opening scene of Hawaii Five-0. And he says, you can look at it, and you look at it, and then turn your back to it and say, it's not there. He said, you can make yourself believe that, but you're still going to get wet. And I've always thought that was such a great illustration. So
it is. Well, thank you, Pastor Andy.
Thank you.
This has been very insightful. I'm
Yes.
always thankful for all the insights that you bring to the table.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. I always enjoy talking to you.
Well, thank you, everyone out there. God bless you, and we will see you the next time on the Celestial Report with Pastor Andy.